How's it going, sir?
Good. We have to work out the bugs here a little bit. So,
Okay.
Sirius!
Here we go. I want to play that again.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's play it again. That's so badass.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Okay. That's got to be up there for best open of the year. We got to get you in. It's on YouTube. Hold on. Oh, where'd he go? Can't unmute your guest. Come on back in now. What's going on, everybody? It's Robert Phoenix. Welcome to the first edition of Sirius Sports. We're working out a few bugs here, and we will get there. I was just joined by Mr. Al Dawg. It's D-A-W-G. And he'll be back here in a moment, hopefully. I tried to unmute his mic, and he was gone. But we'll get him back in here. How'd you like that intro? Big shout out to Bree Eves. She's right there. Brianna Eves, GFX.
All right, we're back.
We're back. Yeah, I was just giving a shout out to Brianna, who just killed it on that GFX intro and graphics.
Did she? Rihanna's a talented artist. She's got hits.
Brianna, she's got that. Now, I have to take credit for the audio. I did the audio. So she brought the images, and I brought the pulsating electronic beats there.
Nice.
Yeah.
And sort of the direction of it. I love it, man. It looks awesome. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I think this is where it's at. Sports and astrology is the intersection of American culture where guys like me can finally become astrologically literate, because I'm intro to astrology, man. I've only been interested for the last year, but the last month or so, my interest has kicked into high gear now that I've been hanging out with guys like you and Dr. Narco Longo. The astrological layer of truth, it's unavoidable, and it's in everything.
Right, it is. And it's not just the astrological layer of truth. I mean, that's a big, big part of it. But another part of this channel, it will have to do with things like synchronicities and magic with the ICK and some exopolitics and kind of looking at big picture stuff. And I wasn't going to talk about this tonight. It just popped into my head when you and I were kind of like, throwing things at the wall that we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm like, okay, well, who's the father of NIL? And I know who the father of NIL is. And we're gonna talk about him, and it is just one of those things where you're on the right track when you hit the bullseye on a target that we're talking about tonight. So when we go there, I'm going to bring it up. So it's a little bit of a tease, but it's a very cool kind of sync astrologically. So we'll get into that tonight. But if you don't know who I am, my name is Robert Phoenix. If you're here for the first time. I have a bunch of shows that I do on the astrological tip. I have the Astro Weather, which I do on Tuesday through Thursday morning on YouTube on the 11th House channel. And then I have a live astrological show on Sunday night called Sunday Night Astro Live on the 11th House channel. And I've been doing that for quite a while now. And we just had a bang-up show last night. We talked about Hawaii and Lahaina and China and a bunch of stuff, the True Note and Aries, which really figures into sports in a big way, which I think we'll get into a little bit of that tonight. And I've been doing astrology pretty hardcore since 2008 when I started my blog. And I was part of a 25-show series on Gaia TV called The 11th House, which I produced along with Jay Widener. And it was really great, 24, 25 episodes of astrology like we're going to talk about in some ways tonight. And a lot of people still watch that show, even though I did it like, God, almost 10 years ago now. So that's who I am. And tonight and every Monday night, we're going to have Mr. Al Dog here,
Yes.
who is another Virgo. We got a couple of Virgos in the house. And man, we're going to get in trouble, dude. With all this Virgo, we're just going to be so fucking precise about things. It'll be death by 1,000 paper cuts. But my official welcome to you to this show. And let's find out a little bit more about you. I know a little bit more about you, a little bit about you, but I'm going to find out more about you as well, because I don't know everything. I know enough to kind of get the conversation started. So let's hear it. Tell people who Al Dog is.
So Al Dog is an eternal athlete, a lifelong student, and an author, a fiction author. I've just perfected my first book. The new perfected version comes out August 21st, and I'm working very, very hard on a second book about a surf assassin. Yes, you heard that correctly. A surfer who's also an assassin. I like to write funny stuff. And, I got out of the University of Rhode Island in, I think, 2014. And ever since then, it's been a lot of a lot of trial and error, and it's gotten me to where I am today. Typically during the week, I work in the construction field, and then during the weekends, I'm working on writing books. And I'm somebody who has an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, experience, and gravy, as some people might call it, sort of mind-blowing information. And that's what I'm into, and that's what I'm a purveyor of, and that's what I'm a connoisseur of, and that is me show with Mr. Robert Phoenix, the astrologer of the century.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I'm certainly the astrologer of the moment, and
Okay.
that's all that really matters. And gravy is good, and we're going to do our best to bring you some good gravy tonight on tonight's show. And yeah, so you went to, was it the University of Rhode Island or the design school there? Where did you go?
I was in communications and business, aka partying. That's really what I
Right.
majored in, and sort of just had a good time. And with millennials, there was so much pressure to go to college. It became a pretty easy sell for us to go, and we did
Right.
it, and we got out, and we kind of figured out our lives from there. Sort of the starting point after you get educated is truly when it all starts. So yeah, that's the trajectory I was on. I grew up playing football, playing basketball, playing baseball, playing frisbee, playing soccer.
Right.
I think I was the last generation to really spend a lot of our youth outside.
Right.
And I think the
Right.
millennials are actually sort of the last of that. And you can kind of see it with your local basketball courts, courts I used to go to where every nice day there'd be games going. I don't see that as much anymore. And
Right.
that's kind of the path of the millennial that I've been on.
Well, it's really interesting because the millennials show up in 1985 when Pluto goes into Scorpio. In 1985 is, I believe, the first year that the Game Boy, rudimentary version of the Game Boy breaks.
Wow.
So by the time we get into the 90s, and we're clearly in like 92, 93, 94. Yeah, it's all about the handheld, and it's all about the video game. And I remember I had a business. I had a independent music mail order business, and I had a fax line. It was really a lot of obscure electronic stuff and like what we called ethno ambient and industrial. And my fax line was the same. Well, it wasn't the same. It was really close to a number for a Nintendo giveaway.
Huh.
And so I used to get all these calls on my fax line from these kids who got the number wrong. And every call that I got was a ding on my fax bill. Like, it wasn't like it is today. So I rang up this like really enormous fax bill because this Nintendo promotion was really close to my number. And so I bitched and moaned at Nintendo about it. It's like, I'm having to pay for this shit. And they actually sent me a check to cover the phone bill. And I got a Game Boy. which I never really used. I think it was the beginning of CD-ROM, and I would use it because it also plays CDs, and so I'd use it as like a part of my mix setup when I would do DJing. But that's so the millennials are the first generation to really wrap their arms around video games, home video, and the portable, the Game Boy, and that changes everything, right? So you guys are kind of the last outpost, I think, of the free range. The early millennials are the last outpost of the sort of the free range writers, and then everything changes, right? It all changes. And anyway, we're glad you're here, and that's a great '70s porn stash you're working on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little 5 o'clock shadow-ish. Like, I shaved and I sort of like time it, because that's really when I like to shine, is with the sort of the 5 o'clock shadow look, a little facial hair. Sometimes it gets scruffy, but I can't, once I get this far, I can't just shave the stash, right? Because then you gotta go with it at this point, and whatever happens, happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. And I've been watching some old baseball games from like the '70s and the '80s. And it was amazing how many baseball players had the porn stash. Like, you go look at, some of the guys in the NBA had facial hair. Some of the guys in the NFL had facial hair, but the baseball guys, they didn't get to the Fu Manchu, I think, until Al Roboski, and he would rock the Fu Manchu. And Raleigh Fingers had the handlebar thing.
Yeah.
But the porn stash in '70s and '80s baseball ruled, and it's like a lost art. So you're right with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with. Well, here's what the mustache does, because I had a buddy who recently grew a mustache, and it doesn't have to be simultaneous with pornography, but what it does, it kind of makes somebody look like an expert. Like, if you have a carpenter come to your house and he's got a mustache, that guy knows what he's doing. Versus hopefully, you know what I'm saying? But it can make people look like experts if they really grow it out. But I'm always changing up my look. I always change up my hair, change up my facial hair. It's just a continuous. Is that a Virgo thing? But it's just continuously changing.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. Virgo is a beautiful sign. But as a Virgo, your birthright is to keep it trimmed. You can't let it get out of control.
That's the thing, because I have super curly, thick hair. It will get out of control.
Right. So you got to rock the Virgo credential and keep it trimmed up. So yeah, man, here we go. It's our first show, and what do we have? We got 14 people. I guarantee you, within 3 months, this show will have at least 38 people. No, we'll have more than that. But no, we're looking forward to doing this on Monday night. And the only thing that we'll have an issue with is we will be competing with Monday Night Football. That's the only thing that I could see in terms of this time slot.
I think working with Monday Night Football, because they can listen to the show while they watch. And for me personally, like, I'm not a huge watcher of the television when I keep up to date with my sports. I can watch an entire game within 5 minutes on YouTube, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what I like to do, because I personally, especially with football commercials, I consider the commercials to be a straight up psychological assault. That I can't sit through it, man. I just can't do it. So I get my sports as efficiently as I can, a lot of times through YouTube, even with these way too efficient, rapid, short form videos where I can get all the highlights and I can see the narrative of what is going on, see the narrative and the plights of some of these players, these coaches, and these teams. That's what I look for, is the narrative.
Yeah, the story is always. It's always interesting to see these stories unfold, whether they're pumped full of steroids in marketing or they're just organically appealing. And that's always the sort of the best. With Mercury retrograde, we'll have to go dive into the past a little bit with Mercury retrograde.
Here's the thing.
Go ahead.
Mercury retrograde. Give me a brief synopsis on that.
So Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year for 3.5 weeks. And so this is one thing that astronomy and astrology have in common. It's when a planet looks as if it's going backwards, right? So both astronomers and astrologers agree on this one thing, this retrograde motion. And all the planets, with the exception of the moon and the sun are involved in retrograde motion. So Mercury retrograde this year, or this part of this year, will happen on the 23rd of September. So we're going to have Mercury retrograde, and it's going to be in Virgo. So it's always a good time to look back on certain epochs or certain eras or certain events. It's really when Mercury retrograde, I think, has a lot of kind of resonant energy. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is going back and looking at the 1972 Olympics, which happened in Berlin, Germany. And you were in the spirit world at that time. But yeah, I was 12 years old, and that's when my whole sports life was just blowing up. And that was one of the strangest Olympics or global sporting events I've ever seen. We'll get into more of it, but it was clearly a tool for demoralization of the United States. And so you're in Berlin, right? You have the West and you have the East with Berlin. And East Berlin, or East Germany, a lot of people don't remember this, but East Germany was a fucking powerhouse in the Olympics. They were on the bleeding edge of sports medicine at that time, which everybody knows was steroids. And the East German Olympic swimmers, the women, they looked like men. They were, who knows, maybe some of them were men, but they absolutely dominated. And I think that year, I think the United States came in third with the medals between Russia and East Berlin. It was like this really deflationary or deflating moment for the United States, because the United States had dominated the Olympics prior to that. Most of the sports that were worth watching in the United States was really dominating. And that wasn't the case during the 1972 Olympics. There was some real fuckery with the U.S. men's basketball gold medal team. And, well, they weren't a gold medal team. It was a gold medal game against the Russians. And the American sprinters who had their heat times changed so that they couldn't qualify, right? The two guys that could give the Russian sprinter, the great Valery Borzov, a run for his money, didn't make it because Mercury retrograde, they changed. It wasn't Mercury retrograde then. It'd be Mercury retrograde when we talked about it. They changed their times without telling them, so they couldn't get to their heat, right? They couldn't qualify, and they weren't going to change it for them. So that's a big backstory of the 1972 Olympics. And then, and this might even, like, I don't know if I want to threaten our YouTube status this quickly, but then you have the Israeli weightlifting team that gets basically hijacked by the PLO, right? And there's a lot of really high strange around that moment, and I'm not saying coincidentally, but we live in a world of synchronicities that will pop, right? So as this whole thing is going down with the Israeli weightlifting team and theoretically the PLO, who is the most successful athlete during the 1972 Olympics? You probably won't know, but it was Mark Spitz, who won, I believe, 6 gold medals in swimming. And then Mark Spitz happens to be Jewish, right? So you have this kind of weird theater going on, right? There's this strange kind of Holocausty vibe, right? The terror vibe. And then you have, the most prominent athlete of that Olympics happens to be Mark Spitz. Anyway, we'll get into some of that when we go into Mercury retrograde, because it's really interesting to look at. I think that Olympics particularly. But anyway, so we're going to get into a lot, and tonight we're going to talk about name, image, and likeness. And why don't you go ahead and tell people what the NIL is about, Al? And I'm going to go in and I'm going to go find the chart and some other stuff.
Okay. So NIL is essentially college athletes getting paid. That's what it is. It stands for name, image, and likeness. So they don't really get paid by the universities. But let's say if I'm a college football player, I'm a college basketball player, I'm a cute female volleyball player, whatever the case may be, I can go out and sell my name, image, and likeness to a local car dealership, to a social media company, whatever the case may be. So if I'm a superstar, it doesn't matter if I'm a running back or some cute basketball girl, I can use my celebrity status essentially to make money. And this is something that came about starting in around 2019, but really became super official in 2021. It has completely changed the landscape of college sports. I'm personally a huge fan of the NIL, and I think there are 3 poignant examples that we can discuss that sort of led us to where we are today with the NIL. Also, the transfer portal, especially with college football, is getting a little crazy. It's changed the game for sure. But with the NIL, there's 3 poignant examples in my view that kind of led things to tip in the favor of the student athletes, right? First one was Reggie Bush. You remember him, right, Mr. Phoenix? Reggie Bush, Terrell Pryor, and Shabazz Napier. Those 3 examples probably are the best in explaining how we got to the NIL, right? So first of all, just looking at your television on a Saturday, there are college football stadiums with 86,000 people, 100,000 people, 90,000 people, you name it, okay? The universities are making millions and millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions off these student athletes. People want to watch them play football. They want to watch them play basketball. Those are the 2 money makers, football and basketball, specifically football. But when you see that happening and the players aren't making any money at all, they're living in dorms, and you could say, oh, it's a free education. Really? Come on. Education. I went to college. You fill in little Scantron bubbles. Okay. Education, please. Anyways, so that's been the selling point for decades that they get an education, but I don't think anybody really takes that seriously anymore for the most part. There are some benefits to a college degree. Don't get me wrong. There's some awesome benefits, but it's not comparable to the tens of millions of dollars that the players are making for these universities. So let's take it back to 2005. Reggie Bush is an electric running back for the University of Southern California. They go on to at least make the national championship one year. I believe they lost to Texas. So he was outrageously talented. I'm sure you've heard the name. YouTube his highlight tape someday. So he's outrageously good. What happens down the line? It's found out he was accepting money because he's a broke college student making the university tens of millions. So he accepted money from some company, some boosters, some whatever. So what they do? They took away his Heisman Trophy. They wiped him away from the record books, all because he accepted some money. It's hardcore slavery, or at least it was for a time period. Terrell Pryor, he was a quarterback for The Ohio State University. If you're not familiar with Ohio State, it's basically an NFL mini team. Most of the teams go to the NFL, and they regularly sell out an 86,000 person stadium, right? So it's big time, very, very big time. Terrell Pryor was this huge quarterback, superstar. He got in trouble because he signed autographs in order to get some tattoos. Pryor with the NCAA. How ridiculous is that? That's hard.
Getting the tattoos, the wrong start anyway. Right?
Right. I mean,
I'm going to be the get off the lawn guy here every now and then. Right.
Yeah.
That's going to be a little bit of my role. But yeah, that's a bad start anyway. Yeah. So Reggie Bush. Let me bring his chart up here since we're talking about astrology. Reggie Bush happens to be what? He happens to be. Let me go back to screen. Where are we? We're over here. Reggie Bush happens to be this.
Is he a Leo?
Nah, dude, come on. I got to pull the chart off. He is exactly what his sign would portend. If he's the guy that it has to do the crime, right? What sign? Here, we'll do a little astrology 101.
Okay.
Do you know what sign is associated with scapegoats?
Capricorn.
Hold on a second. Let's see. Pisces.
Huh.
Pisces. And Mr. Reggie Bush is Pisces.
Pisces. Okay.
Pisces. Yeah. So I am working on a different browser tonight.
Okay.
So I'm trying to. Now I'm gonna have to go in here and do this. Yeah, he's a Pisces. So what is he doing? He's basically taking the rap for everybody else. Let me break this chart. But he's a perfect example of the sign. While I bring Reggie Bush's chart up here, I'm not a huge fan of the NIL.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of the NIL is because I think whether or not you fill out a Scantron or not, you're still saving a huge amount of money if you get a full ride. I mean, if you get a full ride, you're saving, I don't know, 45, how much do they charge at a really good school like UT? I think it's around 18 grand a semester. So about $36,000 a year plus, let's round it off to about 40. And you let's say you go for 4 years, that's an $80,000. Like that's a bill. You have all these people who have taken out student loans, and that in and of itself is like really heavy, right? The whole student loan thing.
So,
all right, go ahead.
Here would be my question to you, though, real quick. So let's say I'm Terrell Pryor, or I'm any athlete. Would you, as a not a fan of the NIL, would say I can't, sign autographs in order to make money because I'm getting this free tuition?
I think that no, I don't. If you're going to sign for autographs and get money, I think there's a big difference for signing autographs and getting money, and essentially being a paid athlete, right? I think that's, and I know it's a paid athlete if you're doing that. Look, people have been getting paid in the NC2A for years.
True.
Eric Dickerson at SMU had a brand new car, and all those guys were paid. They just didn't get caught. You don't think that Shaq didn't get any payments to go to LSU? Of course he did, right? Michael Jordan, University of Kentucky was paying dudes for years. Rick Pitino, who I think coached in Rhode Island or Providence, got in trouble for that. So, I mean, this stuff has been going on for a very long time. And usually what will happen is you'll get somebody that's either been fired from a program and wants to get back to the program, they'll spill the beans, or somebody inside of their conference, who wants to knock them down a peg, get them suspended. I mean, this is just me. You're going there for 4 years. You're getting a free scholarship, and you're also getting benefits like meeting alumni and people that will play a role in your future that other students won't get. So I think that there's a benefit to getting an athletic scholarship. The whole thing of getting paid while the school is making a shit ton of money, I understand it, right? But there's always been a wage gap in society. There's always been one, and I don't have a problem with people earning their way, kind of up the wage gap ladder. That's just me, but maybe things have changed, and astrologically, we're moving into Pluto and Aquarius, and all the rules are going to be very, very different as a result of this. So I know I just may be somebody who has a quaint view of the world, and that actually, working hard and, putting your time in and kind of earning your dues is what people do, instead of just coming out and saying, oh, look, I deserve all this money. And I think it could be counterproductive for somebody who could make a lot of money in college, and unless they have really good values and good people around them, it could absolutely ruin their trajectory, right? That's just my thoughts on it. So I don't have an answer, by the way. I really don't have an answer. But I think that we already have a challenge with college in general in terms of what it's teaching, or how it's being taught, and how it takes us out of the cycle of the wheel, which I've talked about. So then you throw this in, and then we can talk also about all these conferences, which I think are really interesting. Let me see if I can find the Reggie Bush thing. I have it off here.
Yeah.
On the computer.
So I see what you're saying, but I think that, like, let's say you're Arch Manning, okay? You just signed with the University of Texas.
Yeah.
You could make the argument that, like, he's going to bring so much money into that school that it far surpasses any of his alumni connections, because he's on a trajectory to the NFL. And when you look at the college football landscape currently, they can play for up to 4 years of eligibility, but they can stay within the NCAA for up to 6 years, right?
Right.
So it's basically the minor leagues.
Well, kind of is, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly, I've been to UT games. They're going to sell that stadium out, whether it's Arch Manning or Tommy Manning, right?
Yeah.
That's just the nature of UT.
Yeah.
Now, if Arch Manning went to Memphis State, that's a different conversation, right? Now, all of a sudden, Memphis State, which might get, I don't know, half the fans on a Saturday, they fill it all up, right, with Arch Manning there. So clearly, yeah, I get it. I mean, I understand it, but I feel like what's going to happen is that college football is going to become like, it'll be a version of pro football.
Yes, I think it already is.
Yeah, you're going to have two competing leagues, and what's interesting is that when football became popular in the United States, college football was actually more popular than professional football. College football was a really big deal. The NFL was just kind of starting out, so they were competing for a while, and it culminated in the 1960s and 70s, mostly the 70s, where they had either the NFL championship team or the Super Bowl team would play the college all-stars, which was the most ridiculous fucking thing, right?
Wow.
Like no matter how good the all-stars were, they weren't as good as the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Like they just weren't as good as the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the dance between college football and pro football has been going on for a while, and now it's a whole different dance. I think that ultimately, and and we'll talk about this too, with the realignment of the conferences and the Pac-10 or Pac-12 just going away.
Yeah.
Right. It's just gone. And it doesn't make a lot of sense in some ways, because how I'm thinking about the UCLA girls softball team getting on a plane and flying to Rutgers, right? Because that's what they're going to have to do. That is what they're going to have to do. And those are all costs that are going to be incurred upon the university. You could flip it around. You could have the Rutgers girls softball team go to Southern California to play, although they might enjoy that more since Southern California is a little cooler than Piscataway or wherever they're from. But I think that this is going to be very, very problematic, because that girl who's playing on that softball team, there's a really good chance that her parents might live in that area. Let's say it's Long Beach State, right? Or we'll go back to USC because they're leaving. Those girls' parents, so let's say the girl grew up in Glendale, California, and she's on this softball team. So who are they going to play? Well, they're going to play UCLA. They'll play regional games with San Diego State, and they'll go all up and down the coast, right? They'll have the Pac-10 or Pac-12 schedule. There's a really good chance that those girls' parents can actually get in their car or, take a short plane ride to go watch their daughter play. Like, that's not going to happen when teams travel all the way across the country. It's like, yeah, well, we might be able to get one game in per year if we go to see our daughter go play softball at, University of Wisconsin or whatever, because we have family there. But I feel like it's going to really disrupt. Like, it'll probably be great for the three super conferences, but it won't be great for, I think, the smaller schools. And I think the athletic programs at the smaller schools are going to be actually in trouble because of this. Anyway, this is Reggie Bush's chart,
Yeah.
right? So we have Sun in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces. He's got the Moon in Cancer, Saturn in the first house, Scorpio rising. So we've got a grand water trine right here. And where did Reggie Bush make a mistake, if there was any mistake in his chart? Well, it's probably this Pluto Jupiter square, and looking at whatever, right? Like profiting, profiting off his ability, third house, which is running the ball, right? The third house is ruled by Gemini. So Jupiter Pluto square is a risk, right? That's anytime you get a square with Jupiter, it's like opening something up and it's a risk. So there's that. And then the Uranus square to his Sun and Mercury. And I don't think Reggie Bush was being rebellious at all. Like Reggie Bush was just doing whatever the college players did. But here it turns out to be disruptive, right? That Uranus square to the Sun is disruptive. And he lost his trophies and all. I mean, I'm really not in agreement with that. Like the guy lost his Heisman Trophy. I mean, I thought it was bullshit. But he's a Pisces. So Pisces in general are going to play the scapegoat role, right? Like theoretically in the story of Jesus, he is sacrificed. And what he does is he initiates the Piscean age, right? The age of sacrifice. So Reggie Bush is living up to his sign, right? He becomes kind of a sacrificial goat in a lot of ways. So yeah, there you go.
Wow. I want to get back to what you were saying about the conferences a little bit. And I didn't know that. See, this is why this is the premier sports show, because I had no idea about the sign of Pisces being the scapegoat. I didn't know that, and the sacrifice. It makes sense now that you mentioned it, but that's quite interesting. But with the conferences, I know recently the Pac-12 essentially imploded. Am I right about that? Freaking Oregon and I think Washington.
You had Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA. They joined the Big Ten. And then you had Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. They just joined, the Big 12.
Yeah.
So you have these conferences that are realigning, and it really come down to about 40 teams who will be part of these super conferences, and then out of those 40 teams, they'll probably have something like a 6 to 8 seed playoff, right? Instead of the 4 teams they have now, they'll probably go to 8.
It's gonna be 12 for football.
12. There you go.
Yeah.
And it'll be those 4 conferences. So we're probably talking about 48 teams. Okay, so here's where we get into sort of the sync for what's going on, because there's always something happening with sports that is cultural in its import, right? So when I look at what's happening with the conferences, to me it mirrors the balkanization of the United States, which started to take place in 2020 when Trump decided that he was basically going to let all the states run their own COVID program, right? That's what happened. So on March 13th, and then the next month on April 13th, everything is codified. Trump says the states are going to run their own COVID program because they'd be better at it. Like you can't run the same program in South Dakota that you would with New York. So what happened during that time also is we had the whole George Floyd thing happen, right? And we became constellated as a nation. You had all these people starting to move from red states to blue states. I mean, you could even make a case that these states in California, the schools in California, and even the ones in Oregon and Washington, like they mirror this migration, leaving these West Coast cities and these West Coast states. In a lot of cases, they'll wind up playing in much more red areas, right? Like you could, even though Ann Arbor is like really liberal, Michigan has by and large been a kind of Democratic state, but Trump carried it during the last election, right? Ohio State has been liberal, but it's also been Republican. Trump carried it. When Trump won in 2016, he carried Michigan, he carried Ohio, he carried Indiana. So there was a shift, right? This kind of tidal shift in middle America. So now you have these teams that are from California, and they're playing elsewhere, and all these other teams are playing elsewhere, and we're not one country right now. We're broken into all these pieces, right? Red states, blue states, and what's happening with the NIL and the NC2A is that it's mirroring that, right? It's mirroring this whole process. So we have balkanization across the board, and that's what sports usually does. It shows us what's going on in the bigger world. And there are a lot of examples of that, which we can get into. But those are my thoughts on what's happening. And all that took place when the true node was in Gemini, right? So when we deal with the nodes, the ascending and the descending plane of the moon. And right now, the ascending plane of the moon is in Aries. So this is a great time to do a show like this, right? We'll talk about warriors and athletes and all the stuff that goes along with Aries. But during the summer of Floyd, the true node was in Gemini. And, when you deal with something like Sagittarius, it's like this big idea. The United States is a big idea. If you look at the Sibley chart, it's a Sagittarius rising. Well, it makes total sense, right? It's a big idea. It's like a big child that just wants more and wants to expand and have foreign intervention, which we really shouldn't be doing. That's another side. But what happened is during that time, the true node was in Aries, and it got fractal. Everything became fractalized. So how the states did their own business, how the states dealt with this, that, right? Like, here in Texas, I can do anything pretty much where I lived with COVID, right? Pretty much anything. Go to California, and man, that was a whole different scene, a whole different story. So this is what is happening now in college sports. It represents the balkanization of the tradition of the NC2A and the backdrop of where we are now. And that's all that all happened during the true node in Gemini.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, because the dissolution of some of these conferences represents sort of a implosion of the traditional college football or college athletics scene. And you're seeing that also with the balkanization of America, the slow balkanization. I think it's more of a cultural balkanization, really. Because I could see it totally happening, dude. I could totally see it happening fast. I could see, Alaska breaking off, California breaking off, Texas breaking off, doing their own thing. I think that could happen very fast at any moment.
In spirit, we're already kind of there, right? In spirit, when this all started. And this is all astrology, right? This all started when the 49ers played the Baltimore Ravens in the Super Bowl, and you had the two Harbaugh brothers, right? Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh, and it was brother against brother. And where did they play the Super Bowl? In New Orleans, right? Which was the home of this, theoretically great battle, burning the city down, the heart of the South, right? So when that season started, the Super Bowl season started, the NFL Network did a story on the Harbaughs, and it showed them, apparently they're both like war buffs, and more importantly, Civil War buffs. So you saw the Harbaughs before the season started go to this Civil War reenactment, right? I'm like, whoa, that's really interesting. Like, these guys are like, those guys that go to these things, they reenact these battles and shit. And I thought to myself, well, this is a sign, right? This is brother versus brother. And that to me was the initiation of where things were going. And that they even had that on the cover of Sports Illustrated with the two Harbaugh brothers, and it happening in the South. And there's this really wild moment during that Super Bowl where the lights go out. I don't know if you remember that, but it was really bizarre and almost, something that you would expect in a wartime scenario, where the lights would just go out. And it was really, that was an interesting time, because I was tracking Colin Kaepernick a lot astrologically, and I actually predicted what was going to happen to him and Alex Smith during that season, because Alex Smith is a Taurus, and he has Saturn in Taurus, and Colin Kaepernick was a Scorpio, and I knew Alex Smith, who, by the way, went to the same high school as Reggie Bush. They played together in high school. That was Helix High in San Diego. And Alex Smith was going through his Saturn return. And I'm like, this guy's going to lose his job. He's going to lose his job to Colin Kaepernick. because Kaepernick was the opposite sign. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Alex Smith had his either True Note or South Node in Scorpio Taurus, one of those things. And I looked at the schedule, and I said, and I was on a message board back then, 49ers message board. I said, this is what's going to happen. This weekend, Alex Smith is going to play. He's going to get injured against the Rams. He'll never play another game for the 49ers again. And because I could see this astrologically, it's exactly what happened. He never played another game again. I think he played maybe a couple snaps the following season. He mop up. He was done, right? So, I mean, Kaepernick was the guy at that point, right? And I was tracking him a lot. And I'm looking at his chart, and I said, wow. By the way, Kaepernick is a really dark chart, like really, really dark. He's Sun in Scorpio with a Pluto-Sun conjunction in Scorpio, like very dark chart. He's got Moon in, I believe, Aries, Moon in Aries. But I looked at his chart. I said, man, there's something dark around Kaepernick in this Super Bowl. There's a darkness around this game. And that's exactly what happened. They had that period of darkness. And Beyonce does this weird, halftime thing. And when you slow everything down with the halftime stuff, you can see the that are being subliminally broadcast. And it's like a strobing ritual. Right? Something happened after that whole halftime thing, and then the lights go out, and the 49ers begin to make this miraculous comeback. And of course, it doesn't work because pass interference was probably the call, but it didn't happen. Yeah, but it feels to me like during that time, like that's the beginning, right? That is the beginning of the balkanization. When we have the brother versus the brother theme, right? The two Harbaugh brothers. By the way, John Harbaugh is a Libra and Jim Harbaugh is a Capricorn, and their father, who was the coach at Western Kentucky, is an Aries. So you had a T-square in the Harbaugh family, right? That must have been fun to be around. But right. to me, that's where things started to go in a very different direction.
Okay.
And yeah.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about, a softball team traveling from California, traveling to the Midwest because they're in the same conference, right? Makes no fucking sense. Makes no sense at all for a fucking softball team. It does make sense for the University of Oregon to travel to Georgia, which we saw game 1 of last year, because they're both professional football teams. So here's my follow-up question to that. The softball thing doesn't make sense. And that's insane that players and families are going to have to do that, right? If you're from the University of Washington, you're going to travel to the Midwest 5 to 6, like how often? That's insane. So with balkanization, right? Things get crisscrossed, cultures separate. Things don't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense for us to be in the same country anymore. This is parallel that I'm seeing here. It doesn't make sense for University of Oregon softball players to travel to the Midwest however many times per year. That's insane, right?
Yeah.
So we see this parallel with balkanization where it's like, hey, we have a completely different culture. We don't even occupy the same world anymore, let alone the same country. We're a different freaking species at this point. You know what I'm saying? Let's separate. Yeah. So with that parallel of balkanization that we see with these conferences, at what point do we see people take more actionable, sensible steps towards something that's more homeostasis with their own nature versus this insanity, like, a softball team traveling across the country 5 times, 20 times a year?
Yeah, I think this thing is going to have to fall apart, honestly, for it to happen. I don't really see how they're going to sort it out on that level. So here's what I think will happen. We've had 2 really major decisions by the Supreme Court. One was, of course, giving abortion back to the states. Like that was huge. The other was the repeal of, the equal opportunity stuff, right? Like, what do you call it? I'm having a blank. But they repealed.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Affirmative action.
Thank you. they repealed affirmative action. Okay, so the Supreme Court has weighed in on 2 really important decisions. Huge. I think things come in threes. So I think the next thing that the Supreme Court would probably roll back would be Title IX. And
which is women's sports, right?
Right, women's sports. And so once they set up Title IX, the universities had to treat that softball team like it was the football team, even though the football team and the basketball team was bringing in most of the revenue.
Which is nuts. It's so nuts. It's so nuts when you think about it. You know what I mean? To have the softball team be treated the same as the football team, because one is a professional freaking football team, okay, at the University of Oregon, right?
Yeah.
And softball's not there. It's never going to be. And
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
so
interesting,
I think that's what'll happen. They'll probably repeal Title IX, affirmative action, right? Abortion, we're gonna do away with affirmative. So I would, and if they do that, it's over, right?
Yep.
You'll have the women's athletic teams basically dropping out or just playing a small regional schedule, right? Like I could see the women's softball team at USC playing Cal State Fullerton or Pepperdine or any number of teams. You'll just see this massive reordering of how things are done, and it'll be and I think it could happen during the True Node in Aries, because the South Node is in Libra, and that's all about the feminine, right? Whereas the True Node in Aries is about the male or masculine energy. So I could actually see this, and then the South Node in Libra has to do with adjudication and fairness and all those other things, right? So it is in the descendant, right? It's not on the descendant in the chart. It's just on the descendant in terms of its transit. Whereas the True Node in Aries is ascending, right? So you have the rise of male energy, the masculine principle, all those things. Martial arts, warriors, boxers, war. That's the other side of this. And then you have essentially the descent of those Libran values, which are fairness and balance and equanimity. So that's what I think. And I could see this happen sometime in the next year and a half, because they're not going to be able to sustain it. And the Supreme Court has shown that they're willing to really mix it up if they need to. I got another chart here.
Okay.
This is an interesting chart. So the person who is really the guy that's, I would say not unintentionally, but he's the guy that had the biggest hand in players getting paid. And it's a guy by the name of Ed O'Bannon. You know Ed O'Bannon?
I don't.
So Ed O'Bannon played at UCLA, and I think he went to Modern Day High School, which was a big basketball high school powerhouse. So he and his younger brother, Charles, were these great, legendary Southern California high school recruits. And Ed was better than Charles, but Ed had a really bad knee injury. And he came back, and he was a good player, not great, but better than good in college basketball. And I think the team with Ed O'Bannon and Tyus Edney and his brother Charles, I think they won the NC2A tournament with Jim Herrick as the coach, who I think coached the Rhode Island team at one point. Jim Herrick was the Rhode Island. Anyway, so Ed O'Bannon couldn't make it as a pro. He was a really good college player. Had he not hurt his knee, he probably would have been a great pro player. But you know what Ed O'Bannon did? He took on the NC2A. And he has been the guy that's been trying to get players to get paid, college athletes to get paid. So this is Ed O'Bannon driving this thing for a long time. And I went to go look at, this is what I love about astrology and about what we're going to do here. I went to look at Ed O'Bannon's birth chart, and guess what I found out? I'll bring it up here.
Yeah, I have no guesses because, like I said, I'm intro to astrology. So if there's any time, when you say something like, the True Node is in Aries, don't be afraid to explain it, because I'd love to learn about this stuff.
I'll bring it up. Ed O'Bannon's birthday is today.
Okay. Wow.
right?
That's
So
crazy, dude. That's
right?
and a
This
half.
is
That's
this is
insane.
what we're talking about here, right? Synchronicities, timing. Today's his birthday. So this is the guy who is, by and large, indirectly responsible for the NIL thing that we're talking about. So what do we have here? Well, he's got Sun in Aries. He's got Mars in Virgo. Look at that. 29 Aries. 29 Aries. Looked like it was in Virgo. I'm really just kind of looking at his chart now because I just popped it up before the show. And Jupiter is retrograde. And I think, this is very interesting because Jupiter is all about expansion and opportunity. And I think Ed's journey was interrupted, right? But his Jupiter is also conjunct what we call the galactic center. And the galactic center is at 26 Sagittarius. And it is the theoretical center of our galaxy. And there's something really interesting about that degree. And if you have a planet around that degree in your chart, there's a really good chance that you have a sense of purpose or mission, that you feel like, like God talking to you, right? So Ed O'Bannon had a big purpose here. Like he was driven by something. The galactic center is also known as the great attractor. So he's got Sun and Mars trining Jupiter. And the retrograde is probably, hey, let's open up the kitty. Let's open up the pot for everybody to get paid, right? So that's what's going on with Ed's chart. And he was pretty tireless, right? So where do we see the tireless component here? Well, Pluto can play that role, right? Like really, really obsessive. And where's Pluto? It's at the very first degree of Libra. So when we get into Libra, what are we talking about? We're talking about balance, fairness, right? Equanimity. So it's a transpersonal planet, but he's got it locked and loaded at 0 degrees, which is the first degree of Pluto in Libra. And then what do we have going on here? We got a Jupiter square, right? So Jupiter in Sagittarius is squaring this. And basically, what did we talk about with Reggie Bush, right? That Jupiter square opens things up. It's more of a sense of what if, right? What if, or why not? And so if you have a Jupiter-Pluto square in your chart, what are you doing? You're dealing with taking a risk, right? And Sagittarius rules what? Law, big laws. So you can see Ed O'Bannon through this square. He's on a mission, right? And I could also see in his chart where like his knee injury and not being a professional athlete was probably devastating to him.
Wow.
Because he's got this Mars-Neptune square. And I think in some ways, he made this personal. Like, I think he made it personal. Like, I couldn't make it. I couldn't achieve my dream. But people who were as good as me at UCLA, well, I want to see them get paid in the future because really that was the height of my career, right? That's when Ed O'Bannon was peaking. He was never going to be a pro. And so what has he been doing? He's been fighting for all these guys to get paid. So it's a really, just from that part alone, right? To me, that's interesting. And today happens to be the guy's birthday. So happy birthday, Ed. I hope you're enjoying your victory here with the NIL.
Yeah. I mean, okay, I got another NIL sync for you, and the Owl Dog is involved. This is my personal theory. Okay, so Shabazz Napier, University of Connecticut, I think it was around 2014, 2015, they won the national championship. And after the game, Shabazz Napier gives his speech. He's angry. He's mad. He goes, "We some hungry Huskies." He's talking about how sometimes late night in his dorm room, he's starving because he's got no money for food, and he's winning national championship. So he gives this big passionate speech about how he's a hungry Husky. "We some hungry Huskies," blah, blah, blah. And he, goes off essentially after winning the national championship. Prior to that, my friend and I, we had a startup company at the University of Rhode Island. It was called hungryroadie.com. You would order food online or to a hub or like a Seamless or something like that. So what we would do, we would work out deals with the restaurants where they would have this thing called Eat Cheap Week, where there would be all these awesome deals. And then friend, we're handing out a bunch of flyers. Hey, check out these deals for Eat Cheap Week. Okay. We did that at the University of Rhode Island. We also did it at the University of Connecticut. We're going hungryhuskies.com, handing 10,000 flyers for our big promotional week, hungryhuskies.com. So this was like a huge thing on the University of Connecticut campus. And then Shabazz Napier, after winning the national championship, and he causes a scene, essentially. He gets pretty passionate about, being some Hungry Huskies. And I think that was actually a huge factor in the eventual NIL that we're seeing today. And there's a little Al Dog tie-in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how long Ed O'Bannon was involved in. He was suing the NC2A.
Yeah.
Right. That's what he was involved in this thing for a long time. Let me just give you a kind of a background on
Ed O'Bannon.
Ed O'Bannon. Yeah, he played 2 seasons for the New Jersey Nets, and then he wound up playing in Europe for a while, because his game, I think, could probably translate somewhat in Europe. Let me do this. We've got one of these browsers going on. Okay, let's bring them up here. This gives people an idea about who this guy is. And remember, he's a Leo, right? Today's his birthday. This is the guy.
Ed O'Bannon.
Right?
Wow.
So here we go. Class action against the NC2A. Ed O'Bannon was the lead plaintiff in O'Bannon versus NC2A, an antitrust suit filed against the National Collegiate Athletic Association on behalf of its Division I football and men's basketball players over the organization's use for commercial purposes of the images of its former student athletes. The suit argued that upon graduation, former student athletes should become entitled to financial compensation for future commercial uses of his or her image by the NC2A. In January 2011, Oscar Robertson, considered one of the greatest basketball players of all time, joined O'Bannon in the class action suit. On August 8th, 2014, Judge Claudia Wilkin ruled that the NC2A's long-held practice of barring payments to athletes violated antitrust laws. In March 2015, O'Bannon appeared in a faux commercial of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver on HBO that criticized the NC2A's payment practices regarding student athletes. With March Madness approaching, the commercial featured a fake video game named March Sadness 2015 that mocked the experiences of college basketball players in relation to the NC2A. This game is every bit as fucked up as the real thing, stated O'Bannon in the segment. In 2018, he published a book about his fight with the NC2A, Court Justice. Inside the story, My Battle Against the NC2A, O'Bannon supported the Fair Pay to Play Act, a California law that allows college athletes to receive endorsement deals. That was huge.
Yeah,
right? That set the stage for everything.
Yep.
After the Supreme Court ruled in the National Athletic Association versus Alston, that's the NC2A restricted trade violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, the NC2A allowed athletes to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. So this doesn't happen really without O'Bannon, right? He is, driving the chariot, across the sky, right, in order to get this thing done. So this is your guy, right? And today just happens to be his birthday. And it's a Leo. He's a Leo. Of course he's a Leo. He wants to get paid. Right?
Yeah.
He wanted to be compensated for the time that he was really at his height, which was when he was at UCLA. And
he's so pissed that he wasn't compensated, right? And
I think there's something to that, right? Like in his salad days, his halcyon days, his glory days, he made UCLA pretty, a bit more wealthier, after he left, right? And he was the 9th overall pick. That's a pretty high pick, but he only played 2 years because his knee was not great. He had a bum knee. And then the other thing too, he has a little stinky tinky in his background.
Stinky tinky? What the hell does that mean?
Well, Ed O'Bannon originally planned to attend University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Okay.
But he did not sign a letter of intent with the university at the suggestion of UNLV head coach Jerry Tarkanian. However, when UNLV's men's basketball program was placed on probation due to recruiting improprieties, meaning the boosters paid him, O'Bannon rescinded his commitment and instead attended UCLA. So this is what happened. 6 days before the official start of practice, O'Bannon tore his ACL as he landed awkwardly on a dunk. Now, this is back before they had the really good surgeries, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. So it was told he might not be able to walk again properly. And then he got a graft from a cadaver. So he was an early adopter with some of the knee surgery stuff. But UNLV was really corrupt. They paid players, right? Like there's a whole 30 for 30 on UNLV and potentially the implications around being paid. And here's the problem with the whole UNLV story is that because they're in Las Vegas, there have always been hints that there were games that UNLV threw because of the players' involvement with certain people from the Vegas gambling scene and organized crime, right? So this gets into this whole gambling thing that you and I were going to talk about at some point, right?
Definitely. So before we get into gambling, I have a question for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So before that, I love how I'm going to learn how to read these charts about somebody like O'Bannon that I wouldn't know how to read without you as interpreter, because I would look at that chart and I would know the basics, right? But you're looking at that chart and you're literally reading it. You know what I'm saying? So I want to be able to get better at that. But my question to you is this. So let's bring it back to Shabazz Napier. He's from the hood. He's from Roxbury. He's at the University of Connecticut as a basketball player. He's a pro. Okay. UConn, that's a professional basketball team, right? He just won the national championship. He probably has $147 in his bank account.
Right. Yep.
How do you tell that kid that he can't sell his name, image, and likeness?
Well, I think based on the rules at the time, you would say, well, you have to graduate or you have to leave, right? I'm not going to cry, shed a tear for Shabazz Napier, because he can do things athletically that I wouldn't even get close to, right? So at that level, he has an edge. Like if you think about it, and I think you got a little sniff in the NBA, right? If you think about it, the amount of people who have or have won the gene pool lottery at that level set themselves apart. They're a different version of the 1%, right? And it's like, well, if you play your cards right and stay healthy, unlike Ed O'Bannon who tore his knee, which is why Ed went after the NC2A and wanted to be paid for what he did, right? You could probably get drafted, and if you're good, you'll get a rookie contract, a good, decent rookie contract in the NBA, and maybe you get a couple more, you're set for fucking life, right? Like, yeah, have a little patience. And, the school gets to get paid, and the coach gets paid. Coaches get a shit ton of money, and the athletic director gets paid. In a lot of cases, they paid their dues. They paid their dues to get to where they are. Whether they're good dues or bad dues, they paid their dues. And what's happened with our society is that everything is on demand. Whether it's a video or an MP3, whatever, right? Everybody's been used to this or gotten socially engineered into an on-demand society. Going back, and I've thought about this a lot, like if you had a stereo in your car, you were dependent upon what the radio was playing. Now you could move it around and go from station to station and find something you liked, and then you had the ability to like throw in an 8-track tape or a cassette tape, right? So you had a little more control over your experience with media. If you go back to television, right? Back in the day, there were 3 analog stations, right? You had the 3 major networks, their local affiliates. You had a couple of other stations, and maybe you had a couple of UHF stations. It wasn't on demand, If you wanted to watch a TV show, you had to follow the TV show, right? You had to make sure that you were going to watch next week, unless you had a VCR, which came later, right? So there was a whole different culture around consumption. And now we live in this world where everything is on demand. including people wanting to get paid immediately for their services. And I don't necessarily think it may not be too bad to wait a little bit, right? Like wait a little bit. But I'm not sure if we can put the genie back in the bottle. It's out there now. And they found a way to do it, right? They found a way to pay the players. But I guarantee you that in 2 to 3 years, college athletics will be broken. It'll be broken.
It'll be what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
It'll be broken.
Okay.
They'll have these major conferences, they'll have these travel schedules, and let's say you're a school like San Jose State, right? And you play in the PCAA or the Mountain West or whatever you're playing in now, or St. Mary's, which has a really good basketball program. You're fucked, right? You're fucked. If you're St. Mary's might be better off because they're a private school and they're the Dominicans and they got a shit ton of money, so they may be better off. But a school like San Jose State, I mean, unless Jerry Yang wants to give them a bunch of money because of his Yahoo stash, they may be okay. But these schools will go away. They just won't have sports, or if they have sports, it'll be like on an intramural level.
Yeah.
Right. So think about that. Right now, you've got, let's say, 40 to 50 teams in a major conference, and then you have a pool of athletes that are trying to get to those 40 or 50 teams. And what happens with the rest of those guys? Where do they go? Right? Because I think that ultimately we'll see this balkanization. Now, local sports may not go away completely. You might be able to have some smaller leagues, like, put together like Boise State, Idaho State, maybe Washington State, Oregon State. Maybe you have some regional stuff. And you may have enough people in the stands and the local TV contract to be reasonable, right? But I would say slice off the bottom third, right? Slice off the bottom third. And then what happens with things like historical Black colleges and universities, which are already losing out, right, to these other colleges for great athletes. People forget that if you look back in the 1960s and the 70s, those HBCUs produced really great athletes like Willie Lanier, who else? Robert Brazil and Walter Payton came out of Jackson State. He was an HBCU guy, Doug Williams. Right. So what happens to those schools? They're already battling for athletes, and they're losing out to mid-majors, or sometimes they might get lucky on a guy. But forget it. No, none of these guys that are going to go to the top 50 schools will even sniff an HBCU. So it's, we're gonna see something very, very different, and I think it will be another version of pro sports, and probably wind up being like a more a more integrated minor league to the NFL. That's how I see this.
Definitely. Yeah, I see it going the same way, and I think the big winners are the big institutions with branding power. The UTs, the Oregons, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the LSUs. That's a professional football team. Probably been a professional football team for the last 3 decades, but it's just becoming official. And I would agree with you that it's just going to become more just blatant that this is a professional sports league. These are the Power 5 conferences. It might go in. I could see the SEC. The SEC is adding Oklahoma and Texas next year. I see them expanding into 2026. Okay. They're going to get some ACC schools. They'll probably get Florida State at some point. They'll probably get Clemson. It's weird that Clemson's not in the SEC. So I think that it's just going to become these super leagues. The Power 5 will become a Power 2. And then when it's eventually powers, they're all pros. Just cut the fugazi, cut the nonsense. These are professional athletes. And I think that's heading that way within the next 5 years, easily, potentially 2 years, we'll see a completely drastic different scene.
Yeah. And I don't think it's going to have a good effect on the NFL either, because you look at like Jeff Garcia. Jeff Garcia played at San Jose State, and he went up to Canada to play for a while. And he eventually took over for Steve Young And he was actually a really good quarterback in the 49ers system. That world does not allow Jeff Garcia to play, right? Who else?
I got a good example for you.
Derek Carr.
Yep.
Derek Carr, Fresno State, great college quarterback. He'd be on the bubble with this model, right? So I think that ultimately it'll have a deleterious effect on pro football. And
I think
to bring this back to the astrological world, it really mirrors Pluto and Aquarius, because that's what we're talking about, right? Like a Capricorn is all about hierarchies and old school and old power, right? Like that's Capricorn. And we had a brief glimpse of Pluto and Aquarius, and things got fucking wacky. It started in May, and Pluto was in Aquarius for about 6.5 weeks, something like that, 7 weeks. And what happened during that time? Well, we had, gay, transgender, LGBTQAI plus month, right? Like, oh, look at this shit. Like, it just got wacky. And then you had the whole Dylan Mulvaney thing and the Bud Light thing. And then as soon as Pluto went back into Capricorn, Starbucks basically put an end to their promotion, right? They were going to do, the whole, gender rights thing, sex rights thing for the entire month. And then they said, no, we're not going to do it, right? So synchronistically and coincidentally, Pluto went back into Capricorn. So we went back into this original model, right? Like, we're not going to do this way. But by the time we get into November of next year, Pluto will be officially and engage in Capricorn for the next 15 years, right? I'm sorry, Aquarius, for the next 15 years. So this mirrors all that, right? It's the end of, how these things have been built together. Like the house of the NC2A is crumbling. It's like building 7, and something new is going to come out of it. And what comes out of it is going to be very different than what we've seen, and it will have a very, very rapid downstream effect with pro sports.
Okay. So I want to end the NIL discussion with a bit of a plot twist, with another unexpected winner of the NIL. It's actually the running back position, because I'll give you a great example. Bijan Robinson, who just came out of the University of Texas, he had a great automobile NIL deal. So he was driving a very, very nice car, made a bunch of money in college. So he had a great college career. He doesn't have to risk his life necessarily in the NFL for the next 5 years, taking steroids, doing whatever it takes to make it as running back in the NFL. So it sort of puts the running backs who are losing in the NFL in a better position with college football, because they can essentially be a pro for 3 to 4 years. And then maybe if they go on to the NFL for a couple of years, that's a big win. So just a good example of what you're saying, that it might actually hurt the pro game a little bit, but a winner might actually be the running backs, because they can play pro from 18 to 2022, right? And they don't have to go through a car wreck every week to play pro in the NFL. But let's move on to gambling, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, he's, I think, kind of a rare. I think he's an outlier because he's so good, right? If you get a guy from a mid-major, he's not going to have the car deal with the dealership in Austin, right? He may have a deal with the local ice cream parlor or something.
True,
but it won't be like that. There's always going to be unicorns, and he's kind of a unicorn. Susie Gemini has a good comment here. Can you see that? I hear you. I am biased because my son wants to play college ball, right? Well, if her son is in the upper 1% of his sport, he'll have an opportunity to with this deal. If he's not, let's say he's in the upper 10%, which is still a really high number, it's a pretty good chance if you got to, these power conferences, which is what we're talking about, there's a good chance if you make it, you may not even see the field, right? But if he's at a mid-major, there's a really good chance that he could get a scholarship and maybe even play. So this is something that if you invest in your kids, it's just going to be way more competitive along these lines. So what's going to happen as a result of that? More helicopter parents,
Big
competing for
time.
fewer places, right? There's already enough stress and pressure on kids as it is.
Yeah.
And I coached my son in his baseball years, and some of it was pretty serious. Like we were on some travel teams that were very competitive, and I saw that landscape up close and personal. And there were times where, there were times where I kind of was a bit of a helicopter dad. I'm not gonna lie, but you know, generally I was pretty good at being reasonable. I thought with my kid, but yeah, the running back thing is interesting. So we're just talking straight sports here, but the running back issue for people that don't know, the running back carries the ball in football, and for a long time it was always the glamour position. Right? Who did you grow up with watching running backs? Like, who did you see and said, "Oh, I like this guy"?
Okay, Curtis Martin, who's like a Marshall Falk, Terrell Davis, Edgerrin James.
All those guys made really good money because they were so good at what they did. Right? They had speed, power, balance. Astrologically, the running back would be kind of a cross between Mercury and Mars. And in fact, one of the most famous running backs of the 1970s was Eugene Mercury Morris, right? So there's a little bit of astrology, right? Running the ball, he's Hermes, cutting through from one end zone to the other, basically a messenger of the gods, right? So, by the way, the quarterback is Apollo. The quarterback is always Apollo, so he's a sun god, right? He's like the chosen one. Everything revolves around the quarterback. He's the center of the team's solar system. So what's happened with running backs is that the game has changed. Like it has changed drastically. So in the 1990s, here in Texas, some high school coaches were developing what they call the spread offense. And the spread offense would have 4 wide receivers, sometimes a tight end, and 1 running back. That comes out of something called the run and shoot, which was pioneered by a guy by the name of Mouse Davis. And then his great student of the run and shoot was a guy by the name of June Jones, who played for him at the University of Portland. So this style of football started to become popular in high school. And the reason it became popular is because they didn't have to have a bunch of formations, and they didn't have to feature the running back. The running back was just one guy in the entire offense, right? So then you didn't have to have a huge playbook. That was another big selling point of this offense. So you could put athletes at quarterback who could throw the ball and run with the ball. And then you had guys on the side of the field with sandwich boards, right? With all the different little symbols and shit. So they basically have one formation and 2 plays that they'll call. And they'll all look over there, right? They'll all look over to the sideline and they'll see the sandwich board so they know what play to call. It's all based on that formation. And so they teach this in high school and they teach it in college. And now it's infiltrating into the pros, right? And there's only about 5 or 6 teams in the NFL that have fullbacks. So if you're going to have a running back, you got to have a fullback. And these formations don't feature fullbacks. So essentially what they did is they said, let's take advantage of athletes. Let's dumb down the system a little bit. Let's create this offense. And as a result, the running back is a casualty. Now, if I'm a kid and the glamour position was running back, when I was growing up, I'm not playing running back anymore. Sorry. I'm going to play quarterback, or I'm going to play wide receiver, or I'm going to play cornerback. Fuck that. Fuck the running back. You guys don't get paid. And it's just a casualty of the sport. If they went back to a pro set offense where you had 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and 2 running backs, a fullback and a running back, yeah, then all of a sudden the running back would have more prominence, right? It's kind of like what's happened in the NBA. Like the NBA game has changed. There's so much spacing. You have 3-point shooters. Back in the day, they didn't have that. Everything went into the big man, right? The big man was the running back of the NBA. And they don't have that now. It's like, guys like Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille's really good, but unless he was a rim protector, and could stretch the floor by hitting the three, he'd probably still have a place in the game, but it wouldn't be like how it was when he was playing, because everything was packed in, right? So sports change, and they change, and it's really interesting, right? Because as we move into Aquarius, we're going to see more changes. We'll see not just changes to the sports that we are already familiar with. We'll see changes in new sports will become popular, in sports that, in many cases, we may not even really be aware of at this point, right? The one sport that I think that they're going to really put a lot of elbow grease into making popular is soccer in this country, right?
Well, I think so, a little bit. I think it's been attempted before. I'd like to speak a little bit about soccer and why Americans don't like it. Okay. But I don't see soccer being expanded. I see the UFC being expanded. Okay. That's the one sport I see becoming bigger and bigger, because I remember a time when something like the UFC had to be on pay-per-view because it was considered grotesque. It was considered barbarous, but now it's as mainstream as ever. You see Donald Trump going to a UFC event. So I see this is what I see, because I've been thinking about this a lot since our last conversation. I see the NFL becoming a little bit less violent, but the violence, the population's desire for violence will be quenched by the UFC, because it's pretty freaking barbaric. It really is. Like, at the end of the day, just two guys fighting, just fighting to a bloody mess. But I want to talk about why I don't see as an expansion of soccer and why I think it fails in the United States. And that's one thing very specific. And it comes down to dishonor. Now, soccer, I love soccer. I love playing soccer. I think it's a beautiful sport to watch, except for this one thing. And that is the culture of diving and rolling on the ground and pretending you're hurt and crying. Grown men. It's disgusting. So with Americans, we have athletes like, let's say, Brett Favre, who will play with he'll play with his arm broken when it's his throwing arm. Literally. His dad dies. He's got to suck it up. He's got a game to play. Okay. He's played with broken ribs. That's a tough all-American man. And then we watch this soccer, great athletes, great. You look pretty out there. It's fun to play. Love it. But we see the best players. We see Messi, who just came over to Miami. Big fucking deal. Okay. He rolls on the ground and cries like a bitch when he gets hurt. And then he's up 5 seconds later. So the reason why Americans don't like soccer, and I don't think it'll ever catch on in the mainstream way, they might try to inflate it with all these superstars. Who gives a fuck? Because it's very, very dishonorable and disgusting the way these players roll around on the fucking ground. Fucking diving in the NBA doesn't compare to soccer. And
but even diving in the NBA is dishonorable. I agree with you.
Yeah, so that's the thing issue I have with soccer, and I think that's why Americans don't just dislike it. I think Americans are disgusted by it and that whole diving culture, because it's not even addressed. They don't even talk about it.
So I'm a big follower when it comes to programming. Like, I follow programming. Okay. And so when I go to ESPN, and by the way, I do think that over the next 2 years, MMA, grappling, boxing, these are all going to be very popular over the next 2 years. But they are definitely doing everything in their power to make soccer a big deal in this country, right? Like this, if you cruised ESPN's homepage, you wouldn't see this, right? You wouldn't see global soccer scores. Europe's big leagues are back. There's a little bit of UFC stuff, right? Then, of course, you have the ongoing promotion of the WNBA. So ESPN has decided that they are going to program. Look, this is another different sport, right? Inside 1B girls quest for Olympic gold in breakdancing. Like, when the fuck did breakdancing become an Olympic sport? But this is what I'm talking about with Pluto and Aquarius, right? What we see as traditional sports are going to become very untraditional. And the reason I bring soccer up is because it is in some ways an Aquarian sport, right? like everybody gets to touch the ball. In football, not everybody gets to touch the ball. If you're a center or a lineman, and maybe a center you get to touch, but if you're a lineman, you get to touch the ball, right? And that's one of the appeals of soccer. Oh, everybody can play it. If you have a daughter, she could play it. If you have a son, he could play it. Hell, they could play together. Hell, if you got a daughter that thinks she's a son and vice versa, they can play soccer, right? That's soccer. And Pluto is an Aquarius. And the other thing about soccer is that it's really, really big in countries all over the world, right?
Yep.
It is the global sport.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at this push for globalization. And will there be a backlash? If they try to ram soccer down Americans' throats, I think that maybe there could be a bit of a backlash, only because with the Aquarian material, when it starts off in one direction, there's an inversion. And usually what happens is that something else takes place. It's the thing that really wasn't like set out to take place. That's what happens with Aquarius. But there we go. Like, this is what I'm talking about here. We're going to see a whole new set of sports with Pluto and Aquarius. Sunny Choi, the top-ranked B-girl in America. Did you know about this?
I did not. I'm not up to date.
And you're a millennial, man. Like, you know, this is kind of your world with hip-hop and everything.
Well, here's the thing, man. I cut ESPN out of my life at least a decade ago. It became unwatchable, like just absurd, God. But in terms of globalizing games, there's soccer, which is number one, and number two is basketball, in my view.
Big. It is big, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the commonality those two sports have is they're very easy to pick up and play. You need a ball and a hoop, or a freaking just a ball, right? Versus something like American football, I don't think it'll catch on that much overseas. You see it catching on in Mexico, and that's about it. But I don't see it catching on ever overseas in a major way. I don't see it happening. Same thing with hockey. It's not going to catch on anywhere other than cold weather places.
Although what's really ironic is that the fucking Florida Panthers win the Stanley Cup almost every year, it seems like.
That is funny, yeah.
And to get there, they had to beat the Carolina Hurricanes. Yeah. So hockey in the South, right? The Las Vegas Knights are playing. I mean, they're huge, and they're playing in the fucking desert. That's Aquarium. Look at what Mary Lee says. I believe that our new 2 million Hispanic residents will watch.
No, she's right. No, I was about to say that the so Latino population in the United States is growing in such a way that it could sustain soccer. I think she's absolutely right. In like a place like Miami or a place like, Southern California, there could be a completely different culture. They're huge soccer fans, and you just don't know about it. You don't care. It's not your thing, but it could totally sustain. I think she's right.
Yeah, I actually, when I was in high school, I had season tickets to the San Jose Earthquakes, and it was their first season in San Jose. And I had a paper route, and I thought, I'm going to buy myself some season tickets. Right. So, in fact, I would even take the bus down there to the stadium. And that was the year that Pele played for the New York Cosmos.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was there when Pele played. He was way past his prime. But it was still like, it was the place to be. Right. And we had Georgie Best, who was just notorious fucking partier. Like, he was a great soccer player from England, but he was a big time drunk. And his buddy was, you ever listen to the band Thin Lizzy? You ever listen to them at all? So Thin Lizzy was great. They were from Ireland, and their lead
boys are back in town. They got that one hit.
That's it, right? Yeah. So Phil Lynott, who was the singer for Thin Lizzy, really charismatic guy. He and George Best used to be buddies, and they would go out and they would absolutely get shit faced and do all kinds of coke and shit. And then George, he eventually kicked the booze. And turned his life around. He was a really interesting character, but his final run was with the Earthquakes. So we got a lot of guys who were at the tail end of their soccer career. So I was there. I grew up with it. I had season tickets. My buddies in high school played soccer, and they were like first generation of dudes from other countries. Like my buddy Joe was Portuguese. His father was born in Portuguese. All these other guys were, second generation. And my buddy Keith, who was second generation English, really good soccer player. So San Jose was a melting pot for stuff like that. And I played a little bit, but I was never going to play with these dudes at all. I think with Aquarius, they're really going to try to market this thing. And even when you look at Messi and the Miami team, you look at their jerseys, they're purple and pink, right? Like they are going for an effect. They are going for sort of the softening of the hues and the tones. And they're bringing in this megastar to get everybody's attention. Will it be successful?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe on a scale.
I mean,
not on a huge international scale. Oh my God, so many people are watching soccer now. It's huge. I think we've seen this with David Beckham and, like you said, with Pele. So I think it'll sustain a subculture, but I don't see it taking center stage in the mainstream or even competing with football or even basketball in the United States.
I think ultimately for Americans, soccer does not have enough scoring. It does not have it. It's kind. You know what soccer is? It's kind of like going out on a Friday night in America. You take lots of shots, and you're lucky if you score. That's soccer, right? And Americans like scoring. We used to have the indoor soccer league, and people used to turn out for that thing because it was in a small arena. You could bounce the ball off the boards, right? So you get carom shots. But that was fun. Americans like stuff like that. I just don't think there's enough scoring in soccer. Ultimately.
Yeah.
All right, we got a good crowd. We got some badass babes in here tonight.
We got Thor at the door.
Mary Lee. Thor's not a babe, but
he's a dude.
He's a dude who some chicks think he's a babe.
Okay.
Look at what Mary Lee has to say. She says Nashville's new soccer team sells out almost every game. I couldn't tell you how, but they do. Well, they probably buy tickets and give some of them away.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And speaking of programming, like something like the WNBA, that's not a viable business. That's not a profitable business. I think it's just strictly programming.
Yeah, I mean, it is programming. Absolutely. The NBA keeps it alive, right? But now, for the NBA, it used to be a loss leader. Now, because of BlackRock and ESG scores, it's great for them, right? They get all these benefits from supporting the WNBA because, if it wasn't for the
what
NBA.
What are the scores?
What's that?
You said BlackRock, it's good for their ESG scores or something?
ESG is environmental, social, and governance, right? So if you're a business and you meet your ESG threshold with BlackRock, that makes you eligible for things like low interest loans, right? The ESG score is there to basically police what you're doing inside your company. Now they'll say that you have to watch your ESG score because if you have a bad ESG score, it will reflect back on your stakeholders, and your stakeholders won't support your business. Right? You'll get targeted, picketed, canceled, whatever. Right? So what they want to do is they want to ensure that you have a high ESG score, so that you're going to be considered safe. Right? So it's either going to be the environment or the social or the governance. So for the NBA, WNBA, they're going to have a really high social score because they're carrying this entire league, which makes it better for the NBA is almost unassailable in the eyes of BlackRock, right? So ultimately that's how it's going to pay off for them. Did they start out to support the WNBA because of this? No, I don't think so. I think they believe that it could be a viable business model. But again, what's going to happen to women's basketball when the stuff that we're talking about kicks in, right? What happens to women's basketball if Title IX gets revoked. Remember, bringing this back to astrology with Aquarius, all these things were kind of set up back in the 60s when they were really striving for quote unquote equality. And now with Pluto going into Aquarius, that might be inverted. That might be those entitlements might be revoked. So where does that leave the WNBA? Everything's going to get reshuffled. That's what I think. Yeah.
I mean, so if let's say Title IX gets revoked in a few states, like that, the SEC becomes a professional football league.
Oh,
you know, they don't, just overnight. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I can see the Supreme Court pulling Title IX. In fact, if there was a sports betting service that you could put a bet on the Supreme Court pulling Title IX within the next 2 years, I would make that bet.
I might take you up on that. That's interesting. Well, let's talk about betting. That's a great segue because this is the biggest thing in America today. I feel sports betting. I mean, it just became legal in the state of Massachusetts since March. Now, I went to college, right? And I never got into sports betting, but a lot of people around me were really into it. So much so that I didn't even know it was illegal. Like I was like, when people told me it was illegal, I was like, wow, I had no clue because a lot of people are doing this all the time. You know what I mean? So from the, I never got into it. I placed a few bets. I'm into futures bets with the Super Bowl because like we established, oftentimes there's a direct correlation between what's going on in the country and sports. So if you're able to predict that in time, you can make some coin. I've done it before. I've lost before, but it's fun. Okay. People can judge me all they want. That's my thing. I like futures betting with football, and that's about it. Okay. But sports betting is headed in a very specific direction, in my opinion, Mr. Robert Phoenix. It's becoming rapid, on demand, like you said, on these phones. And here's what's going to happen.
Yep.
Here's what's going to happen, man. And there's a company called Better, BETR. It's sort of led by Jake Paul. He's their spokesman. So what Better is going to do, it's going to allow people watching the game to bet in real time, not just on who wins or loses, not on the score. Will it be a running play or a pass play? 5G internet, crypto. Boom, boom, boom. That's how fast it's going to be. So people are going to be on their couches, on their phones. You think it's going to be a pass? You think it's going to be a run? Oh, I'm going to bet $20 like that. Instantaneous as can be. And now a lot of American men are couch locked on Sundays, especially with something like NFL Red Zone. But now the experience and how locked in people are going to be watching football, watching basketball, watching baseball with rapid, quick micro betting, they call it micro bets on micro interactions of the game. Hey, are they going to score one touchdown next quarter? I think so. I'll put $20 on it. That's the future of betting. And I got to say, not looking too great for the average Joe if they're able to bet that fast with that much efficiency. What's your take?
Yeah. Well, so that technology was around in the 90s.
Okay.
I used to go to sports bars, and they had the handheld devices where you could actually call the play that was going to happen, right? And the better you got, you would rack up points. So you would be playing against other people inside the bars. So that's been around for a while. What's going to happen when college players bet? Right, we're already seeing it. We're seeing this trickle down effect. I think betting and gambling, as ubiquitous as it is, could be the thing that could take down sports. Because what we're seeing with pro football is we're seeing guys now get nailed for it. And historically, pro football really frowned on betting. Like Alex Karras and Paul Hornung had to sit out an entire season because they had an association with these gamblers, these mob guys, right? Joe Namath had a bar and a restaurant in New York City, and it was said to have been patronized by mobsters. And Pete Rozelle pulled Namath inside and said, "You've got to sell that place. You got to sell your bar and restaurant." This is when Namath was playing. And Namath was, I mean, you can see the video on him. He's in tears. Like, he doesn't want to sell his place, right?
Yeah.
But eventually he does. He sells it, gets out of it. I mean, that's how staunch the NFL was when it came to betting. And now you got guys, and here's again, we're talking players who are the guys that have been popped outside of Calvin Ridley and what's his name? Is it Jameson Williams, the guy from Detroit who played at Alabama? Those are two pretty high-profile players. Calvin Ridley had to sit out a year, and he didn't even. I think he bet on basketball or something. It wasn't directly related to his sport. He sat out a year, and I think this Jameson Williams guy is going to sit out 6 games. But everybody else on that Detroit team that was betting with him, they're gone. Right? They got cut. So you have these guys who are probably making $700,000 a year, $800,000 a year, which is close to the NFL minimum. They think that they can parlay that into some side cash with betting, so that they can all of a sudden make more money with their gig. They're going to be in for a rude awakening, and the NFL and sports in general has always had 2 sets of rules for players. Right? Like if Michael Jordan did some shit, nothing was really going to happen to Michael Jordan. Right? Like, oh, Mike, you could go play baseball for a year. Go play minor league baseball for a year while this gambling thing that you're up your eyeballs in cools out. Right? Like David Stern basically said, you got to go. There's too much heat around this gambling thing.
Yeah.
But then somebody else who's not as talented as Michael Jordan, they would take, like, for instance, I'll give you another example. I knew this guy who was a cook / chef at a restaurant in the Bay Area. And Joe Montana and Dwight Clark and some of the 49ers would hang out at this restaurant. And one day there was this little side room that they had for banquets. And he walked in there, and Dwight Clark and Joe Montana were chopping lines, right?
Okay.
So did anything ever happen to Joe Montana or Dwight Clark? No. But there were other players in the NFL who had issues with cocaine. And, they got suspended. Don Reese and Randy Crowder from the Dolphins come to mind, right? So there's always been a set of rules for really, really good players and just okay players. So your average player that wants to, again, we're all talking about like deferred gratification. Like put your time in. Maybe you'll do okay. You're lucky you're playing pro football. You're not driving a UPS truck, right? These guys are going to want to, level up, right? Video game mentality. We want to level up. How are we going to level up? Well, why don't we bet? Let's bet on something. So I think it could be problematic. I think it'd be very problematic. And if it trickles down to the college level, dude, who knows? I mean, about Henry Hill and the whole college gambling stuff from the 70s. Do you know about that?
Can you brief me on it?
So, yeah, it was, I believe, Boston College. There was a guy named Henry Hill who was an associate of Whitey Bulger. And he was getting these guys from Boston College to shave points on games. And there's a couple of movies about it, actually. So that went on, right? Like once these college guys got involved in gambling and they started to lose, they had to do a few things for some of these games. And again, I bring up UNLV and their connections to the Las Vegas crime syndicates, right? There's pictures of guys who played on UNLV in fucking hot tubs with some of these crime guys. So, I think once you open the door to betting, it is a Pandora's box. And I think you're right, based on the immediacy of the technology with Pluto and Aquarius. It'll be ubiquitous. It'll be everywhere. I'm not sure if it'll be all that good ultimately for the players that actually play the sports.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it'll be good for the general population, but my guy Thor, he brought up a good little comment here. He said, micro betting while people are micro dosing on psychedelics. And one guy I do want to bring up to psychedelics is Aaron Rodgers. right? Because I personally believe that he's going to be at the forefront of psychedelics being legalized in the United States. And I think it's going to happen, and I think he's going to be there. And I want to get your comment on that, just because is that an Aquarius type thing that we're going to see? And is it sort of in alignment with the balkanization of the United States? Because let's say you're a conservative red state, you're not going to want legal psychedelics. You know what I mean? But just saw like what we saw with marijuana, it slowly happened over time. And I see a parallel with psychedelics and Aaron Rodgers being at the forefront of that. What do you think about that?
Well, before I jump into that, I just want
Yeah.
to answer Kelly's comment here. So I didn't have a lot of time to pick a crowd scene, and I wanted it to contrast with my shirt. And I just grabbed orange. That's all I did. I have no allegiance whatsoever to the University of Tennessee or the Volunteers. So that's the only reason. It's just purely an aesthetic choice. That's all it is. It's interesting that you bring that up, because a friend of mine who I want to have on the show, he happens to be an Aquarian. He's really good with sports medicine. And he went to the University of Liberty and was friends with Eric Green, who actually played in the NFL, was a really good football player. His next door neighbor is Jake Plummer. Do you know Jake Plummer?
I do know Jake Plummer, Jake the Snake for the Arizona Cardinals.
We're going to try and get him on the show.
Okay.
Jake has moved back to Colorado. Well, he's moved to Colorado. Well, he moved back, I guess, because he played for the Broncos. And one of the reasons why he's moved back to Colorado is because Colorado has legalized psilocybin and microdosing. And Jake Plummer is really into this whole microdosing thing, right? So to your point, right, we have an ex-NBA, ex-NFL player who has gone to a state where it's legal, and he's going to put his footprint in that. And Aaron Rodgers is a Sagittarius. So Sagittarians are into journeying, right? They want to expand their consciousness. And the downside with Sagittarius is when they feel like they've found the truth, they can be very, very dogmatic, right? But I think psychedelics have made Aaron Rodgers a better person, because he can be kind of a dick, right? Just talk to his family, right? He can be a bit of a dick. And he took a pretty big pay cut so they could spread the money around in New York, and they could have a better roster. I think he's going to do exceptionally well.
Me too.
Yeah, he's going to do exceptionally well. And I think this guy has figured out that if he's authentic and his internal truth is aligned with the greater truth, that he could do some very interesting things. I just hope that the Austin psychedelic crowd doesn't warp his brain too much. But he's got a very interesting chart. He's got a major stellium in Sagittarius. Very unusual chart. He has what's called the bundle chart. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, because I'd like to go over that. And like, you talk about some of these things. I'm not quite as familiar, but I love learning about it. But yeah, Aaron Rodgers, the Jets are my Super Bowl pick. I think the Jets are going to do very, very well this year. And I have placed financial wagers on it. That's the only type of betting I do. I don't do the point spreads. I just do futures bets. And yeah, my money's on the Jets, quite literally, because I see a narrative that we're seeing out in the world reflected in professional sports.
So here we go. That's
Wow.
Aaron Rodgers' chart. So he's a Taurus rising.
Yeah.
But he has what's called a bundle chart, right? Everything is bundled in one area. The 8th house is the underworld, right? The 8th house is the house of the shaman. Like when the shaman, ingests his peyote cacti, or when the shaman drinks the ayahuasca vine, right? Or when the shaman consumes his psilocybin, where does he go? He goes into the underworld. That's all the 8th house. And the shaman goes to the underworld. He dies to this world, goes to the underworld, and faces his fears, theoretically. And then when he's in the realm of the underworld, right, he receives gifts. He receives a vision or visions. And then he emerges from the underworld with something that he can give to the tribe, right, or the clan. And Aaron Rodgers is a shaman in progress. This is what this guy is. You can see it right here. It's all the eighth house. So he wants to expand his consciousness. He's going to do it through the use of entheogens. This is a guy that has no dynamic tension in his chart whatsoever. No oppositions, no squares, single pointed, single focused, right? Very interesting chart. No earth in the chart with the exception of the ascendant and the midheaven, right? Yeah. Fire, water, fire, air, air, fire, water, fire, fire, water. Chiron in Taurus. Yeah, he has a hard time being in an earth suit. Right? Really interesting chart. Very, very interesting chart. So that's what he's here to do, man. He's here to be a psychonaut ultimately, and expand his field and drop down into the depths of vision. So it'll be interesting to see what he does this upcoming season. The true node in Aries should be pretty kind to him. It'll illuminate his 12th house. We got Pluto right up here at 0 Aquarius. This year it's going to be 29, 20, 27, 28, 29. 0 Aquarius. I think the planet that's going to have the biggest impact is going to be his Pluto, which is at 0 Scorpio. So he's going to have a Pluto square. I think he started to really dive into the psychedelic realm and part ways with sort of authority with Pluto at the final degrees of Capricorn, squaring his natal Pluto in Scorpio. Very interesting cat, right? Very interesting guy. Lots of fire, some air, not much earth. Just those two important touch points. The ascendant, like he's going to show up to the world as a Taurus rising. You can see that in his face. Like he's almost always got like a 5 o'clock shadow. With Taurus rising with men, you'll usually get two types of Taurus rising with men. You'll get kind of the Adonis type that look really like chiseled, or they're flashing physical Venus, which is what Aaron Rodgers does. Or you'll get the more kind of workhorse, stocky, stout sort of Taurus rising figure. Right? The same thing happens with women. Women with Taurus rising will be either kind of Venusian goddesses, or they'll be kind of stocky, kind of, thick, low to the ground, kind of physical people, right? Both men and women will reflect that with Taurus on the ascendant. With Aaron Rodgers, you get more of the Adonis archetype. So, yeah, man, your boy's a shaman in training.
Here we go, Jets. Jets, Jets. Let's go. I'm not at all loyal to the New England Patriots. I like to watch them. I enjoy the Super Bowls, but if I see somebody is going to win the Super Bowl, I have to shift my loyalty elsewhere. And that is with the New York Jets this year. Next year might be different because, I also think Jets being somewhat symbolic of conflicts in Eastern Europe and whether or not that's going to expand or go to Africa, as you've talked about in past streams. We will see.
Yeah, so maybe next week we can get into the cycles of football and how they reflect what's going on in America.
I think that's a great topic.
Yeah,
really great.
Why don't we get into that? I kind of want to keep this show at about 2 hours. Perfect. So that people on the East Coast can get a decent night's sleep. And why don't we do this next week? Next week, I'll have an opportunity to tee up the Johnny Manziel chart. And I definitely want to look at Trey Lance. And a lot of young football fans, especially on the West Coast, are really into Trey Lance. And he's got more Taurus in his chart than just about any other athlete I've ever seen. And in a lot of ways, he's become a very polarizing figure, especially in the Bay Area. So I want to kind of get into that. And I want to do maybe a little prognostication on Trey Lance. So why don't we save Trey Lance and Johnny Manziel for next week? I'll take him out of the title of the show, so people say, well, what happened to Johnny Manziel? What happened to Trey Lance? We'll do that next week. In the meantime, we're going to get a website up and running. We've got a store that we're going to get up and running, and we're gonna play with this thing. And with the True Note and Aries, I think we're going to get a lot of really good content and good mileage, and we'll bring some guests on here. I saw Mark Matheny, who was in chat tonight. We're going to bring Mark on. Mark is an amazing sports astrologer, and he's got thousands of charts, and we can get into teams. We got to have Mark on at least once a month, because he's absolute gold when it comes to this stuff. And we'll pick up some momentum, but we'll have some stuff that if you're into it and you want to buy a cap, you want to buy a shirt, or you want to buy some art, we'll have that. And so we're just getting cranking here. And Al, we're going to have a website, and you write, and you'll do some articles, and maybe I'll pen an article or two. So we're gonna have some fun with this, right?
Like, dude, we're gonna have a lot of fun. This is where it's at. Sports and astrology. This is the place to be. And I had a lot of fun tonight. I learned a ton. And it's just interesting, man. Somebody like Aaron Rodgers, I've never looked at his chart, but when you pull up the chart and it perfectly correlates to his life and his career, it's like, this is where I need to be learning. Yeah. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, everything has led to his descent into the underworlds with psychedelics. You can see it. It's right there. It'll be very interesting to see how he impacts New York. Because when the Jets have a big-time quarterback, it's fascinating to watch, right? Starting with Joe Namath, right? Big-time quarterback. They had Brett Favre there for a little bit. They tried to make Richard Todd sort of the next Joe Namath. Vinny Testaverde was a Jets quarterback. He was very successful. Vinny had one of these really, kind of quiet personas. He wasn't outrageous like Namath was. But Aaron Rodgers, is he going to take the Big Apple by storm? Maybe we'll look at that. We'll get New York's chart. We'll throw up Aaron Rodgers' chart, and we'll see how they kind of lock in with each other. We'll follow that story along the way. So, Al, thanks for being here. Should I play the outro? The intro is the outro?
Yes, absolutely.
Should I do that? All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're starting with a nice, intimate group. But if you're into astrology, you're into sports, and you like the conversation we're having here, join us at 8 p.m. That's Central Standard Time every Monday night. And we'll play around with this stuff, and it'll be fun. And Al, by the time we're done, dude, your astrological knowledge will be just pouring. It'll be bleeding through your third eye. Okay. So
for me in my life, this is the step I need to totally level up, is the astrological knowledge, and I love learning about it. So,
and you brought us some great topics tonight with the NIL and betting and all this other stuff that's really front burner for the world that we're living in. All right, so for myself, Robert Phoenix, and my buddy partner Al Dog, and Bree, who's in the chat tonight, who's cooking up the graphics and stuff. I want to thank you all for being here, and let's go out on this really killer outro one more time. So, Robert Phoenix, Al Dog, Sirius Sports. Stay serious, get serious, be serious. Here we go.
Serious, man. You cannot be serious!